He trimmed hedges and watered grass in silence. No one ever asked his name. Until the base museum opened a new exhibit, and there it was. His photo, his story, his medal. That day, they realized the man mowing their lawn once fought for theirs. Lieutenant Emily Chase had been assigned to Naval's Special Warfare Training Center for exactly 6 weeks. At 5 feet 5 inches with black hair always pulled back in a practical ponytail and calm brown eyes that seemed to absorb everything while revealing nothing, she moved through her medical duties with the kind of quiet professionalism that made her practically invisible to most personnel. She carried her medical bag with practiced efficiency, treated injuries with clinical precision, and maintained the kind of steady presence that characterized the best military medical officers. To the SEAL candidates and training staff, she was simply their assigned nurse, competent, reliable, and completely unremarkable in a facility filled with exceptional warriors. The candidates knew her only through brief medical interactions. She checked their vital signs, treated their training injuries, and monitored their health status with professional competence. But she rarely spoke beyond what was medically necessary, never engaged in casual conversation, and maintained a clinical distance that was unusual even for military medical personnel. They respected her medical expertise, but none of them had ever wondered about her background, her previous assignments, or what experiences had shaped her into the quiet professional they encountered daily. Meanwhile, across the sprawling training facility, another figure moved through his daily routine with even less attention from the candidates and staff. Carlos Martinez had been working as the base groundskeeper for over 4 years. At 52, with graying hair, weathered hands, and the kind of invisible presence that comes with maintenance work, he moved through the facility trimming hedges, watering grass, and maintaining the landscaping that kept the training center looking professional. He worked in silence, spoke to almost no one, and had become so much a part of the background that most people walked past him without a glance. But sometimes the most invisible people carry the most extraordinary stories. Welcome to Silent Salute, where we discover that heroic legacies often hide behind the most ordinary daily routines. Before we continue this incredible story, tell us in the comments which country you're watching from today. And if you believe that true heroes often walk among us unrecognized, hit that subscribe button to support our channel. We're honored to share these remarkable stories with you. Class 298 was particularly intense. 26 candidates from diverse military backgrounds, all pushing themselves through training designed to identify and forge America's most elite warriors. The daily routine was brutal, relentless physical conditioning, advanced combat training, underwater demolition exercises, tactical simulations, and psychological challenges that tested every aspect of human endurance and mental toughness. Through it all, Lieutenant Chase provided medical support with the same steady competence that had characterized her entire assignment, while Carlos Martinez quietly maintained the grounds that provided the backdrop for their transformation from ordinary soldiers into potential SEALs. The candidates had developed their standard assumptions about both individuals. Lieutenant Chase was professional medical support, who kept them healthy enough to continue training, but who seemed remarkably reserved even by military standards. Carlos Martinez was invisible groundskeeping staff who maintained the facility's appearance but had no connection to their training or their warrior culture. Among the candidates was Staff Sergeant Ryan Murphy, a former Army Ranger who'd served 3 combat deployments before applying for SEAL training. Murphy was respected by his fellow candidates for his tactical expertise and leadership abilities, but he shared the common assumption that support personnel operated outside the warrior culture that defined special operations. The nurse knows her medical stuff, Murphy had commented to his teammate during their 5th week, but she's probably the most quiet medical officer I've ever worked with. Professional, but you never get any sense of who she actually is. Petty Officer Rodriguez, who'd served as a Navy corpsman before SEAL training, offered some perspective. Some medical personnel just maintain strict professional boundaries. Murphy doesn't mean they don't understand what we're going through. But Murphy's observation was accurate. Lieutenant Chase's professional distance was unusual even for military medical personnel. Most doctors and nurses developed some level of personal rapport with the personnel they supported, but Lieutenant Chase maintained a clinical detachment that seemed almost impersonal. The situation that would change everything began during the 7th week of training, when Class 298 was scheduled for advanced hand-to-hand combat training. This was one of the most physically demanding phases of SEAL training, where candidates learned sophisticated fighting techniques, defensive tactics, and combat skills that could mean the difference between life and death in close-quarters situations. The training was being conducted by Gunnery Sergeant Michael Torres, a Marine Corps martial arts instructor with over 15 years of experience in military combat training. Torres was known throughout the special operations community for his expertise in multiple fighting disciplines and his ability to teach complex combat techniques to elite military personnel. Lieutenant Chase was assigned to provide medical support for the training evolution, positioned at her standard observation point, where she could monitor candidates for signs of serious injury while remaining ready to respond immediately to medical emergencies. Her role was essentially what it had always been: professional medical oversight and emergency response capability. The hand-to-hand combat training was intensive and realistic, designed to teach candidates the kind of close-quarters fighting skills they might need in operational environments. Torres demonstrated techniques, supervised practice sessions, and ensured that candidates learned essential skills while minimizing the risk of serious injury. Combat isn't about looking good or following perfect form, Torres explained to the candidates. It's about surviving, neutralizing threats, and completing your mission. These techniques are designed to end fights quickly and decisively. The training progression was carefully structured, moving from basic techniques to more advanced applications. Candidates practiced strikes, grappling, defensive moves, and weapon retention procedures under Torres's expert supervision. During a demonstration of advanced chokehold techniques, Torres called for a volunteer to serve as a training partner for demonstrating proper application and escape procedures. I need someone to help demonstrate the proper application and defense against rear naked chokeholds, Torres announced. This is advanced technique that requires precision and control. Several candidates volunteered, but Torres was looking for someone with enough experience to safely demonstrate the techniques without risk of injury. Actually, Torres said, let me get one of the other instructors to help with this demonstration. These techniques require experienced partners who understand the risks and proper safety procedures. But before Torres could call for another instructor, Lieutenant Chase spoke up from her medical observation point. Gunnery Sergeant Torres, she said quietly, I can assist with the demonstration if you need an experienced partner. The entire training area fell silent. Lieutenant Chase had barely spoken beyond medical necessity during her entire assignment, and now she was volunteering to participate in advanced combat training demonstrations. Torres looked surprised by the offer. Ma'am, I appreciate the volunteer spirit, but these demonstrations require partners with martial arts experience. I don't want to risk injury to medical personnel. Lieutenant Chase's response was simple and direct. I have experience with the techniques you're demonstrating, Gunnery Sergeant. I can safely participate in the training evolution. Torres was clearly uncertain about accepting the offer. Military medical personnel occasionally had martial arts training, but advanced chokehold demonstrations required significant expertise and experience. Ma'am, with respect, these are advanced combat techniques. Are you sure you're comfortable with full contact demonstration? Lieutenant Chase stepped forward from her medical station, and for the first time since her assignment to the training facility, she moved with something other than clinical professionalism. Her movement was fluid, balanced, and carried the kind of confident grace that suggested extensive martial arts training. I'm comfortable with the techniques, Gunnery Sergeant. Let's proceed with the demonstration. Torres, still somewhat uncertain, but recognizing that Lieutenant Chase seemed confident in her abilities, agreed to proceed with the demonstration. All right, ma'am. We'll start with basic rear naked choke application and proper escape procedures. The key points are arm placement, leverage, and controlled pressure that stops blood flow without causing injury. Torres positioned himself behind Lieutenant Chase to demonstrate the proper application of the chokehold. The important thing is that this technique must be applied with precision and released immediately when the partner taps out or shows signs of distress. But what happened next shocked everyone in the training area. As Torres moved to apply the demonstration chokehold, Lieutenant Chase suddenly shifted her position with speed and precision that caught the experienced instructor completely off guard. In one fluid motion, she escaped his attempted hold, moved behind him, and applied a textbook-perfect rear naked choke that had Torres completely controlled before he could react. The technique was executed with such speed and precision that it seemed almost effortless. Lieutenant Chase had not only escaped from an experienced combat instructor's attempt to demonstrate a chokehold, but had reversed the situation and applied the technique herself with obvious expertise. Torres, finding himself suddenly in a properly applied chokehold by the quiet nurse he'd been trying to help, tapped out immediately. Lieutenant Chase released the hold instantly and stepped back with the same clinical professionalism she'd shown throughout her assignment. The key to defending against rear chokes, Lieutenant Chase said calmly, is recognizing the attack early, disrupting the attacker's balance, and creating space for counterattack before the hold is fully applied. The training area was completely silent. 26 SEAL candidates and multiple instructors stood frozen, staring at a military nurse who had just demonstrated combat techniques that exceeded those of their experienced martial arts instructor. Torres, somewhat stunned by what had just occurred, looked at Lieutenant Chase with obvious respect and amazement. "Ma'am, where did you learn those techniques?" Lieutenant Chase's response was characteristically understated. "Previous training, gunnery sergeant. I have some background in martial arts." But Torres had been teaching combat techniques for 15 years, and he recognized advanced expertise when he encountered it. "Ma'am, that wasn't just martial arts training. That was sophisticated close-quarters combat technique executed at an expert level." Lieutenant Chase continued organizing her medical supplies while responding. "I've had extensive training in defensive tactics and close-quarters combat as part of my military service." Murphy, who had witnessed the entire demonstration, approached Lieutenant Chase with obvious respect and curiosity. "Ma'am, that was incredible. What kind of training did you receive that included advanced combat techniques?" Lieutenant Chase seemed to be weighing how much information to share about her background and capabilities. "My previous assignments required training in multiple areas including medical procedures, tactical operations, and personal protection techniques." Rodriguez asked the question everyone was thinking. "Ma'am, what kind of assignments require medical personnel to have advanced combat training?" Lieutenant Chase's answer provided some insight into missions that most military personnel rarely encounter. Assignments that involve providing medical support in hostile environments where traditional security isn't available. Torres, still clearly impressed by Lieutenant Chase's demonstration, was beginning to understand that her capabilities extended far beyond standard military medical training. "Ma'am, would you be willing to assist with our combat training curriculum? Your expertise could significantly enhance our instruction." Lieutenant Chase considered the request carefully, understanding that her demonstration had revealed capabilities that could contribute to SEAL training in ways she hadn't originally planned. "I'd be willing to share techniques that might enhance candidate training, but my primary responsibility remains medical support." Master Chief Petty Officer Williams, who had observed the entire incident, understood that Lieutenant Chase's demonstration had revealed expertise that fundamentally changed her potential role at the training facility. "Lieutenant Chase," Williams said, "I think we need to discuss expanding your role here beyond standard medical support. Your capabilities could significantly enhance our training programs." The conversation was interrupted by an announcement over the facility's public address system. "All personnel are invited to attend the opening of a new exhibit at the base museum. The exhibit honors Medal of Honor recipients who have served at this facility." The announcement was routine. Base museums regularly open new exhibits, and personnel were encouraged to attend when their schedules permitted. Most of the candidates and staff planned to visit the exhibit during their free time to learn about the history and traditions of their training facility. Later that afternoon, several candidates decided to visit the museum during a break in training. Murphy, Rodriguez, and several others walked through the facility grounds toward the museum building, passing Carlos Martinez, who was working quietly in one of the flower beds near the main walkway. As they walked past, Martinez looked up briefly from his gardening work, acknowledged them with a polite nod, and returned to his tasks. The candidates barely registered his presence. He was just the groundskeeper doing his job, as unremarkable and invisible as always. The museum exhibit was impressive, featuring photographs, artifacts, and detailed stories about Medal of Honor recipients who had served at the training facility over the years. The candidates moved through the exhibit with the kind of respect and awe that military personnel feel when learning about extraordinary acts of courage and sacrifice. "These guys are legends," Rodriguez commented as they examined the displays. "It's incredible to think that heroes like this actually served at our facility." Murphy was studying the photographs and citations, trying to understand the level of courage and sacrifice that Medal of Honor recipients had demonstrated. Reading these citations, it's hard to believe what some people are capable of when the situation demands it. As they moved through the exhibit, they came to a new display that had just been installed, a section dedicated to Vietnam War Medal of Honor recipients. The display featured several large photographs, detailed battle descriptions, and artifacts from various engagements. Rodriguez stopped in front of one particular display, reading the citation with intense interest. "Listen to this," he said to his teammates. "Army Staff Sergeant Carlos Martinez, Medal of Honor recipient for actions during the Battle of Firebase Charlie, Vietnam, 1969. Murphy moved closer to read the citation. Staff Sergeant Martinez single-handedly held off an entire enemy platoon while evacuating wounded soldiers, sustaining multiple injuries but refusing to abandon his position until all casualties were safely extracted. But as Rodriguez continued reading, something in the description caught his attention. He looked more closely at the photograph accompanying the citation, a young soldier in Vietnam-era Army uniform, posing for what appeared to be an official military portrait. Rodriguez stared at the photograph for several seconds, processing something that seemed impossible. The facial features, the eyes, the overall appearance. Despite being nearly 50 years older, the face in the photograph bore an unmistakable resemblance to someone they saw every day. "Murphy," Rodriguez said quietly, "take a look at this photograph." Murphy examined the picture carefully, and his expression gradually changed from casual interest to stunned recognition. "That face," Murphy said slowly, "it looks like it can't be." Rodriguez was reading the citation more carefully now, looking for additional details about Staff Sergeant Carlos Martinez. Born 1951, hometown San Antonio, Texas, enlisted 1969, served with the 1st Infantry Division. The details were matching what little they knew about their facility's groundskeeper. The age was right, the name was right, and the photograph, despite being decades old, showed features that were unmistakably familiar. "That's Carlos," Rodriguez said with absolute certainty. "That's our groundskeeper. The guy who trims the hedges and waters the grass is a Medal of Honor recipient." Murphy stared at the display in amazement. "We walk past him every day. We've never even asked his name. And he's one of the most decorated heroes in American military history." The realization hit both candidates like a physical blow. For months, they had been ignoring, overlooking, and taking for granted a man who had demonstrated extraordinary courage under the most dangerous conditions imaginable. "Look at this citation," Rodriguez said, reading aloud. "During a coordinated enemy assault on Firebase Charlie, Staff Sergeant Martinez's position was overrun by numerically superior forces. Despite being wounded multiple times, he continued to provide covering fire while evacuating injured soldiers. When his ammunition was exhausted, he used hand-to-hand combat to hold off enemy forces until air support arrived. His actions saved the lives of 12 wounded soldiers and prevented the firebase from being completely overrun." Murphy was studying a photograph that showed Martinez receiving the Medal of Honor from President Nixon. He saved 12 lives in one engagement, fought hand-to-hand against enemy forces while wounded, and for the past 4 years, he's been quietly maintaining our landscaping. The two candidates stood in front of the display for several more minutes, trying to process the magnitude of what they'd discovered. The quiet, invisible man they'd passed hundreds of times was actually one of the most courageous individuals in American military history. "We have to tell the others," Rodriguez said. "Everyone needs to know who Carlos really is." When the candidates returned to the training facility, they immediately shared their discovery with their classmates and instructors. The news spread rapidly throughout the facility. Their groundskeeper was Medal of Honor recipient Staff Sergeant Carlos Martinez, a genuine American hero whose courage and sacrifice had saved multiple lives during one of the most dangerous battles of the Vietnam War. Master Chief Williams, who had been at the facility for over 10 years, was stunned by the revelation. "Carlos has been working here for 4 years. I've spoken with him hundreds of times about maintenance issues. He never mentioned his military service, never said anything about his background. The candidates began to understand that they had been in the presence of extraordinary heroism without recognizing it. Carlos Martinez had chosen to serve his country again in a different capacity, without seeking recognition or acknowledgement for his previous sacrifices. Later that day, several candidates approached Carlos as he was finishing his gardening work near the main facility. For the first time since they'd been at the training center, they actually stopped to talk with him. "Mr. Martinez," Murphy said respectfully, "we visited the museum today. We saw the exhibit about your service in Vietnam." Carlos looked up from his work, and for the first time, the candidates could see something different in his eyes. Not just the quiet groundskeeper they'd ignored, but the warrior who had demonstrated extraordinary courage decades earlier. "The museum exhibit," Carlos said quietly. "I wondered when someone would make that connection." Rodriguez stepped forward with obvious respect. "Sir, we had no idea. We've been walking past you for months without realizing who you are." Carlos's response reflected the humility that characterized true heroes. "I'm just Carlos, the groundskeeper. What happened in Vietnam was a long time ago." But Murphy understood that Carlos's modesty didn't diminish the significance of his heroism. "Sir, what you did in Vietnam, saving those soldiers, holding off enemy forces while wounded, that's extraordinary courage that deserves recognition." Carlos continued his gardening while responding. "Every soldier does what's necessary when the situation demands it. I was just doing my job." The conversation that followed revolutionized how everyone at the training facility understood Carlos Martinez. He wasn't just maintenance staff. He was a living example of the courage and sacrifice that defined the warrior tradition they were all trying to uphold. "Mr. Martinez," Williams said when he joined the conversation, "would you be willing to share your experiences with our candidates? Your perspective on courage under fire could significantly enhance their training." Carlos considered the request carefully. "I'm not much of a speaker, Master Chief, but if you think it would help the candidates, I'm willing to share what I learned." Over the following weeks, Carlos Martinez transitioned from invisible groundskeeper to respected mentor and advisor. His first-hand experience with combat stress, courage under extreme pressure, and making life-and-death decisions under impossible conditions provided insights that enhanced every aspect of SEAL training. "What I learned in Vietnam," Carlos told the candidates, "is that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing what's necessary despite being afraid. When your teammates are depending on you, when lives are at stake, you find strength you didn't know you had." His talks about combat psychology, decision-making under stress, and maintaining effectiveness when wounded provided perspectives that couldn't be taught through conventional training methods. Lieutenant Chase, whose own demonstration had revealed unexpected capabilities, worked with Carlos to develop integrated training scenarios that combine medical and tactical considerations with insights about courage and sacrifice under extreme conditions. "Carlos and I," Lieutenant Chase told the training staff, "represent different aspects of military service, but we share understanding that effective operations require integration of all capabilities: medical, tactical, and psychological." The collaboration between Lieutenant Chase and Carlos Martinez created training programs that enhanced both the technical and psychological preparation of SEAL candidates. Their combined expertise in combat medicine, martial arts, and combat psychology provided comprehensive preparation that exceeded anything previously available. The story of Lieutenant Chase's combat demonstration and Carlos Martinez's revealed heroism became legendary at the training facility, shared with new classes as examples of how extraordinary capabilities and heroic legacies often hide behind the most ordinary appearances. The most important lesson you can learn here, instructors would tell new candidates, is that heroes walk among us every day, often unrecognized and unacknowledged. The person you ignore today might be someone whose courage and sacrifice exceeded anything you'll ever be asked to do. Years later, when both Lieutenant Chase and Carlos Martinez had transitioned to other roles, their legacy lived on in the enhanced training programs they developed and in the understanding that true heroism often chooses to serve quietly, without seeking recognition or acknowledgement. Their story reminded everyone that extraordinary courage and capability often hide behind the most ordinary appearances, and that the people we notice least may be the ones with the most to teach us about service, sacrifice, and the warrior spirit that defines special operations. Carlos Martinez's Medal of Honor citation became a centerpiece of the training facility's heritage displays. But more importantly, his example of continued service without recognition became a model for understanding that true heroism is defined not by seeking glory, but by continuing to serve in whatever capacity is needed. Lieutenant Chase's demonstration of combat expertise and Carlos Martinez's revealed heroism created a lasting understanding that the most valuable people are often those whose capabilities and legacies remain hidden until circumstances reveal the extraordinary individuals who choose to serve quietly among us. This story was brought to you by Silent Salute. Before we leave you today, here's our question. Have you ever discovered that someone you overlooked or took for granted actually possessed an extraordinary background or had made remarkable sacrifices that went unrecognized? Have you encountered people whose true heroism was hidden behind ordinary daily roles? Tell us in the comments about the moments when you realized you'd been in the presence of greatness without recognizing it. And if you believe that true heroes often walk among us unrecognized, choosing to serve quietly without seeking acknowledgement, hit that subscribe button to support our channel. Every story reminds us that extraordinary courage and sacrifice often hide behind the most ordinary appearances, and that the people we notice least may be the ones whose legacies shine brightest. We'll see you in the next story, where we'll discover another incredible tale of hidden heroism and unexpected revelation.